Okay, Clark said we got the green light. So Penny, you want to give us a capsulized update from the weekend? You can do it like this, or yeah, good. Well, I encourage the church not to ask them if they had fun, but to ask them, how they grew, what they learned, what was helpful to them, and then ask them if they had fun. Nothing wrong with fun, but it doesn't have to be the first thing we use as determining whether it was a good trip or not. So, be interesting to see if anybody asked or what questions they ask. But glad you're able to go, and glad you're back safely. You may be aware the elders, we meet every Tuesday night, at least for a little bit. Just make sure we're keeping up with things. And we talked about masks. It seems like everybody's kind of getting rid of their mask mandate. So this is your preview. This is your bonus for getting to show up on Wednesday night, right? Sunday week, we're going to announce this Sunday that we'll be relaxing masks. People, obviously, you can still wear them if that's what you want to do, but we're not going to be as insistent. If you've looked at the chart, it's come down just as fast as it went up, and we're back to the numbers we were at when we weren't wearing masks before. So I think we've come through this variant. We'll see what there is to come in the future. So just a little preview. Well, let's pause and have a word of prayer, and then we'll talk about David some more. Holy Father, we are thankful today to gather in your name. We're thankful that your love is evident to us. We're thankful for all of the ways you sustain us, and not just to survive, but to have life and to thrive and to enjoy the abundance of what it means to be your people. And so we pray that people will see us and see how we live by your Spirit and desire to know you because of the way we choose to live. So we ask for courage, we ask for strength, we ask for the ability to be a witness for you. Father, you know the needs of the people among us for health, for strength, for healing in body and spirit, and we just ask that you continue to send them the people, the doctors, the means for recovery, and that you go beyond what any human can do and bring strength and peace and contentment even in the midst of struggle. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 2. We're making a lot of progress. We're going to get through David and into Solomon tonight. And I promise you, as time goes on, we'll have more prophet and king together. But for David, at least at this point, at the end of his life and into the first of Solomon, the prophet, and I think of particularly Nathan, doesn't get mentioned a lot, but I can't help think that his influence is still there. Because we don't have, we don't have a daily log of everything that's happened and all the notes from every conversation. We just have a few snippets. But I think there's some interesting things as we look at the end of David's life and into the reign of Solomon after David's death that we can at least ask some questions that are helpful to us. So 1 Kings chapter 2, when the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon, his son. Now, I really like that because Solomon is the son he's chosen to continue his work. And so he's going to lay into Solomon a charge, a way forward, a desire from father to son. And I think that's very appropriate. I think one of the great things that parents can do for kids is to help them imagine how they can continue to live in faith, right? We may not choose a career for them, but we can help inform them on the type of people they might be. And so I like this. David says, verse 2, I'm about to go the way of all the earth. You know, everybody's got to die sometime. That's the sentiment, right? So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. And so in this part, David's saying, this is not even from me, your father. This is not father to son. This is king to king, king that serves the Lord, to another king that I expect is going to serve the Lord. And I like that as well. So here's what he says. Walk in obedience to him. Keep all his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul. For some reason I want to add and mind and strength, but that's just a different connection. You will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. So I think this charge starts out well. It seems to be the right kind of context. It seems to be the right kind of emphasis. It's about his dependence on God and his continuing to follow God. God made me a promise, and I want you to continue to fulfill that promise. But one of the things I think we see, even in the midst of this faithful passing on, is David's still a man. And oh, by the way, there are a few scores that I would like for you to settle. So to me, these two things are in contrast. As great a man of faith he is, and David is a man of great faith, he's still also a man, and he thinks in terms of his culture and his expectations. How can we not? It's a lot of work for us to step away, and I call these things presuppositions, the things that are so ingrained in us that we don't think about them, right? Everybody knows this is the way it should be. Well, I think that's partly what's happening to David. There's an expectation in their culture that the one who comes behind you, usually the oldest son, he will clean up the things you've left behind. And certainly as king, he's asking Solomon to do that. So he starts right in. Verse 5. Now you yourself know what Joab did to me. And I want to make a little bit of that. No longer, he doesn't say, you notice how Joab didn't follow God. What's his emphasis? Joab was disloyal to me. And you can read, I'm not going to read all of the passage there, but the issue is Joab on his own initiative, not by David's order. I think he thought David would like it, but David didn't like Joab deciding on his own. Have you ever gotten in trouble for taking too much initiative? Well, sure. Whether that was appropriate or not, whether that's the way it should work or not, we understand you're supposed to be a cog in a wheel and you just do your job, right? Don't start doing somebody else's job. as limiting as that is, Joab stepped out. And maybe it's not because he was defending David, but he murdered Abner and Amasa. And it was peacetime. There wasn't an active battle. So you can see some of their rules. You know, if you're fighting somebody and somebody dies, if we're at war with each other, that's one thing. But Joab took this initiative after things had settled down. He was settling a score. David didn't think he'd settled. And so here's his advice to Solomon. Deal with him according to your wisdom. So he's trying to butter Solomon up a little bit, right? But then he has the word but. And when you have a sentence going on and then somebody says but, what does it act like? Well, that's like a delete key that deletes everything in front of it. Because he's really not asking Solomon to use his wisdom and how to deal with Joab, because he says, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. Well, that to me sounds like he says, take care of him. At the very least, it's make his life miserable. But it's not all about what somebody's done. Notice the next one. Again, he's settling his dad's accounts for him after he's gone. But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead, and let them be among those who eat at your table. So that would be close ally, close friend. They stood by me when I fled from your brother Absalom. Yeah, Jeff. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Good point. I like that. And if it was so important, did David not have the ability to do that? Well, why didn't David do it? Did he not want to tarnish his reputation anymore? Yeah. Yeah. How would he have got anybody to trust him? Right? But when I'm gone, take care of him. Yeah. 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 We don't know any clans of people that would do things like that. So this guy, he's supposed to show kindness to. When David was running away from Absalom, he ended up, in the beginning, didn't appear like he was going to help David, but he ended up helping David. And David was so touched by the help he received, he invited Barzillai to come to Jerusalem. But what was the problem? Well, he was really old. He said, I'm 80. I'm kind of stuck in my ways. I like it in my little town. This is where I want to kind of die. Let me do that. So you can see how David is trying to reward those who helped him, but clean up some of his messes that we can speculate, but appears that David didn't have the political capital to clean up himself. And the other one then, he switches back. Okay, there's another one I want you to take care of, and that's Shimei. Shimei, how would you say that? I don't know. He was a Benjaminite. So who's he connected to? Well, he's a relative of Saul. David replaced Saul. There's bad blood with this, at least this Benjaminite, probably others, because they'd kind of been the King clan, and now they're not. Are you sensing there's just a bunch of drama? A bunch of old scores? The ability to hang on to what happened in the past? And specifically, what this guy had done, if you go back to 2 Samuel 16, when David is with his tail between his legs running out of the city because Absalom's pulled off this coup. You know, he got all his troops lined up and David had to run for the hills. I wrote down 2 quotes. One is, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. So as he was leaving, this guy was pelting David with rocks, insult, the idea of you were wrong, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. He showed a lot of disrespect. But it turned in 2 Samuel 19 when Absalom didn't end up being the winner. May my Lord not hold me guilty, Shimei says. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my Lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. Like, hey, let's just forget. You remember when I was throwing rocks and dirt at you? Can we just forget that? Which was a pretty smart move because David's a warrior. He could have just as easily killed him, right? Verse 20 of 2 Samuel 19. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned. But today I have come here as the first of the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my Lord the king. I used to talk bad about you, but now that you won, I want to be your friend. But we understand that, right? Still happens today. Things get turned around. New alliances are made. You make the best deal you can. Abishai, during that incident, says to David, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed. Here's David's response. What does this have to do with you, son of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? He's just trying to say, David, he just respected you. Why are you doing this? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised him on oath. So that's the background of Shimei. It seems like David made a pretty wise decision. There's been enough killing. There's been enough civil war. We've been fighting among ourselves. Can we just end that? But here he is at the end of his life, telling Solomon to take care of him. Exactly. Yes. Yes. And for me, it just raises questions on how do we handle situations of taking care of our enemies, right? Do we trust in the Lord? That would be the phrase we'd use. Or do we take matters into our own hands? I think it raises some good questions. I'm not trying to put judgment on David that this was right or wrong. I just think it raises fascinating questions for me to examine what my presuppositions about what's right and wrong are, so that I can better make a faithful decision rather than just doing what I think is expedient. Does that make sense? And I think those are tough questions. I don't know that there's one. This may be a brilliant move by David, or this may be not brilliant. It's hard to tell. But here's what we do find out about Solomon. He is wise, right? And he does navigate these situations. Going back to 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 8, he tells him to remember this guy. He did bitter curses. When he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. But now do not consider him innocent. So was that an expedient? Has this guy done some things since then? I just wish we had some more details. But again, he says, you are a man of wisdom. You will know what to do to him. Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood. So a little more clear. I think he needs to go. Right? Then we get to verse 19. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron, 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. And perhaps that was the motivation for all of this. Know who your friends are. Know who your enemies are. Use your wisdom. Clark. Yeah. 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 And so he doesn't immediately do what his father asked him to do. Yeah. So I think we're seeing Solomon's wisdom. Jeff. I'm with you. It is hard because it's probably not the way we would have done it, right? We would have said one of these older first sons has the right. That's the way things work. No, I don't have a clue why it's Solomon. My only guess would be if there was an awareness, maybe the older sons were more warlike like David. My guess would be maybe Nathan has been a mentor to Solomon, and he has developed differently from the sons that were born when David was in Hebron and not king in Jerusalem. But that's all speculation. So less about, to me, the relationship with Bathsheba is the most problematic. That just destroys every sensibility that we have. right? We would be, it would be abhorrent to us. And is, right? When we read it in David. We can make up a point, right? God can use all kinds of circumstances. I don't think there's a clear one you can say this is the reason. The best one I got is that Nathan had been a good mentor, and Solomon was already, as a young man, showing himself to be the kind of man that needed to follow and bring to the kingdom what needed to be brought. Yes. Yeah. Clark. Yeah. Well, because we're at this transition point that we talked about last week, right? David's done a lot of preparation to build the temple. And there's great expectation that it's going to happen during Solomon's reign. I mean, everything's prepared. David, even if you go back to the Chronicles passage, he goes in and he changes the way the priesthood works and what their jobs are and what they're going to be doing as they construct this temple. I mean, this is a refocusing of the kingdom on around the temple in Jerusalem. They've never had this before. And that's important for us to kind of let that soak in. Most of the story of Israel was before there was a temple, because we get, by the time of Jesus, we understand how important the temple is. We know the stories of the exile and temples torn down and rebuilt, and it seems like the temple's always there, but for most of their history laid out, it wasn't. And it's at this point that there's a huge shift. And I think that is going into who he chooses as king. So just remember that fact. And here's what I take from this life of David. He did great things. He did terrible things. He's like us. We can be great, and then we can be not as great. We all have our moments, right? But God still continued to work through him, offer forgiveness. Even perhaps David had trouble with forgiveness, or maybe it was just a political move. But it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complex. He's a more interesting story as a real conflicted person of faith. Because sometimes I think we streamline Bible characters, and they're either completely good or they're of the devil. Well, David was a lot, in some ways, a lot like us. And sometimes he made the right political decision, or perhaps, if I'm not as jaded, he made the right decision for his people, right? He could have killed this guy. He said, I have the power to do that, but we're done with killing. Perhaps he read that moment correctly. And so I like to ask the question, was he settling scores? Was he setting up his son for success? Was he looking at a big picture, or was he looking at a little picture? And I don't know that we get the direct answer. But the intrigue is not done. that's another issue here as kings. As Solomon has become king, the first thing you thought I was through mispronouncing Adonijah's name. No, he shows back up. Because when David's done, the first thing he does, that's the older son that's not going to get to be king. He goes to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and says, she's like, are you coming to me nicely, peacefully? Are you, what's going on here? He said, no, I just have a favor. I have something to say to you. And she says, okay, say it. As you know, he said, the kingdom was mine. Okay, we can debate that. But in his mind, that's what he thought. All Israel, a little hyperbole there, all Israel looked to me as their king. But things changed, and the kingdom has gone to my brother. Oh, darn. That seems to be what he's trying to get across. And so, poor little me, I didn't get what I wanted. I'm just going to make one little request, and please don't refuse me. And she says, oh, make it. And he is bold, isn't he? Please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife. And Bathsheba says, oh, okay, very well. I'll ask the king. Okay, remember who Abishag is. He was the young girl that was David's hot water bottle, right? But I think in a lot of people's mind, she was his last wife, right? Whether maybe Bathsheba just didn't play in the court politics, maybe she doesn't see the big picture here, but Adonijah knows exactly what he's doing, right? If he can marry the previous king's last girl, wife, whatever the rumors were, it strengthens his claim to, I really am the king. Look, I'm married to Abishag. And she was with the king. So Bathsheba gets sucked into the plot. She goes through. Starting verse 19, she goes in and speaks to Solomon. And he's like, Mother, make your request. I'm not going to tell you no. And she lays it out there. And Solomon's immediate response, again, he sees the bigger picture. You might as well request the kingdom for him. That's in verse 22. After all, he is my older brother. Mom, you're not seeing this clearly. He's trying to undermine my authority as king. So Solomon, as much as David did and tried to set up, it didn't stop him being, trying at least to be undermined. So Solomon's response in verse 23, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. So we see clearly, and I think the indication is Solomon's still pretty young, but he saw through this and said, okay, I am going to have to clean this up. I am going to have to take care of it. And now, as surely as the Lord lives, he who has established me securely on the throne of my father David has founded a dynasty for me as he promised. Adonijah shall be put to death today. So he sends out Benaniah, that's his right-hand guy, and he struck him down. And this is one of my favorite parts of the Bible, when somebody gets struck down with the sword, and just in case you're wondering, they add, and he died. Right? That, if if you're paying attention, that happens a lot. He got run through with a spear, and he died. Just to remove all doubt. So Solomon, again, moves forward. Abiathar the priest, the king, Abiathar the priest, the king said, "Go back to your fields in Anath. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all of my father's hardships." So he stripped him of his position, but he wasn't willing to kill him. Again, I don't think Solomon, he's smart enough not to just kill everybody, right? Even though he could have. He's going to treat the priest differently. Strips him of his priestly duties. Joab hears about this. He was in line. Abiathar, Joab, those were the ones backing Adonijah. Adonijah's dead. Abiathar's out of the picture. Joab gets it. He fled to the tent of the Lord, took hold of the horns of the altar. King Solomon was told that Joab had fled. Then Solomon ordered Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, "Go strike him down." He goes in. King says, "Come out." And Joab says, "No, I'll die here." Maybe thinking there's some safety at the altar. Benaiah checks. He said he's not coming out. He's going to die there. And Solomon says, "Okay, strike him down and bury him. And so clear me and my whole family of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed." So, man, it's hard for me to understand that familial responsibility to pay that debt back. I just don't think that way. Our culture is different, but that seemed to be part of Solomon's thinking. And Joab perhaps was a threat. And so that's what happens. And Benaiah takes over the army in Joab's position. And Zadok replaces Abiathar. So Solomon is wise enough to get his people in place in important key positions. It does matter who we can trust. And so maybe there's a lot of wisdom here. Then Solomon deals with Shimei, and just as Clark noted earlier, he strikes a different bargain. He doesn't immediately kill him. This is starting in verse 36. It says, if you stand in Jerusalem, nothing's going to happen to you. He says, fair. I like this deal. But 3 years later, 2 of Shimei's slaves ran off, and he's like, it's been 3 years. He probably won't care anymore. And he went and got them himself. But here's the thing. Solomon did care, and he was serious, and you did make an oath, and I still expect you to hold on to that. And so he says to Shimei in verse 44, "You know in your heart all the wrong you did to my father David. Now the Lord will repay you for your wrongdoing." But King Solomon will be blessed, and David's throne will remain secure before the Lord forever. And then that chapter, go ahead. Yes. Yes. Hmm. I'm with you. It is not. And I think it's instructive, because that was exactly the next sentence I was about to say. The kingdom was now established in Solomon's hand. That seems to be the wrap up here. And I think it's instructive that we don't see Nathan. We're not hearing how he commented on this. And the temptation when we are put in positions that come with power is to wield that power as we see fit. Right? And we can say, oh, God wanted me to do this. We can make up all kinds of reasons. Solomon tries to kind of say that. This is what God wanted, me firmly established. My question is, did it have to be done this way? And I don't have a good answer. But here's what it causes, I hope, for me to do. Who has my ear? That's my question. Who am I listening to that's influencing how I'm going to act toward others, particularly when they have less power than I do? What informs my choices and my values in those kind of things? Was Nathan not involved at all? And we also tend to think of these were all Solomon's ideas. If he was 15, 16, who was he listening to? We don't know. That said, this is what you got to do. But as Jeff clearly pointed out, it doesn't appear that he was really asking the Lord. Clark. So here's the questions it raises for me. What are my rules, presuppositions of the way the world works that I just accept that may not align me with God, but may align me with my culture, and everybody go, well, yeah, that's the way you do it. And we got plenty of those, right? And it doesn't mean they're all bad or wrong, but if we never question them, we have a harder time aligning ourselves with God. And you got to figure out what those are before you can even ask the question, is that what I want to choose? And I keep finding more of those that have been there so long I didn't even know I had them. And I think this passage through here can at least highlight that struggle so that maybe we begin to ask those questions. And so for us, how do we live in 2022 as faithful Christians? There's a lot of ideas how Christians should be involved in the culture around us. Some say you jump in and you just make the best that you can. You work within the current systems. Or others say, no, you try to reform and make things better, but you're still part of the process. Others in the past have said, no, the way is revolution. You got to turn everything over, upside down. So Abraham Lincoln and John Brown had two approaches to what was going on with slavery. One was much more accommodating. The other one said the only way is to turn it upside down. And there are other Christians who say any human system is corrupt. You can't be part. We have to be separate. And there has been plenty of groups that have tried that as well. But they're important questions for us to ask together and to figure out how we move forward within our present time. That I hope as we continue to go through Kings and Prophets, we'll continue to ask those questions. Great discussion tonight. Thank you. It makes the class 100 times better. Thanks. Glad you're here. See you on Sunday. You can read about it in the funny paper. The bulletin. Sorry. Well,